Hi everyone, and welcome to Spot on Philosophy's first YouTube video. This is an interview with David Enoch. This is a professor from the University of Oxford at Balliol College. And I interviewed him on his work called Taking Reality Seriously. This is a book where he defends a theory called Robust Realism. It's a meta-ethical realist view. So he believes there are moral facts, but those moral facts are irreducible. And so throughout the interview, we sort of discussed what that actually means and some of the arguments and reasons he has for holding that view. So yeah, I really hope you do enjoy.
Hi there, this is Swan Philosophy. I'm here with David Enoch from Balliol College, Oxford. And I'm going to be interviewing him on on his work on taking morality seriously. So hi there.
Hi, Oliver. Thanks for having me.
No problem. So first question, I've just prepared a few questions to ask you today. So the first question is, can you outline your meta-ethical view?
Sure. So the view that I argue for, which is sometimes called robust realism, or sometimes perhaps a version of Platonism or non-naturalist realism. Anyway, according to this view, there are some moral truths, perhaps the most basic ones, the ones from which all others follow, that are fully objective, fully necessary. They do not constitutively depend on us at all. When we are successful in our moral inquiries, we find out these truths. We don't legislate them or make them or create them or construct them
Yeah.
or anything along these lines. And furthermore, I think that these moral truths are very different from the kind of natural truths, the truths that are studied by the natural sciences. You can sometimes talk about it in terms of a different realm or a different kind of truth, but anyway, fully objective, does not depend on us in any way.
Cool. So in terms of the name robust realism, how would you define robust in that phrase?
I'm not, by the way, I should say, even though it's a term I use, I'm not too happy with it. I just didn't find a better one. But the way in which it is robust is in being, in some intuitive sense, stronger than other kinds of moral realist views that are out there. So, for instance, I don't think that it's a moral realist view that earns the respectability of moral truths and facts by somehow showing that there really are natural facts, or that they're facts about us, right? So you may think that there are moral facts, that the moral fact that the humiliation is wrong is somehow really at bottom a fact about us and how we dislike humiliation. So I reject that, right? Or you may think that a fact about some kind of warfare being bad is really just a fact about how it causes suffering and how suffering is bad. And I say, no, it's a different kind of fact. So it's robust in the sense of refusing to go for some intuitively weaker versions of realism. Right? There's a way in which ontologically, metaphysically, in terms of its commitments to what exists in the world, this view goes all the way.
Okay, that's quite an outlandish position almost, you know. I mean, in the A-level course, well, yeah. I don't know. I mean, in our lessons right now, we're studying moral naturalism. And so we look at philosophers like Bentham, Mill, Kant. He's not naturalist, is he?
Well, it's not. I don't think it's very clear what his view is, but he's probably not. Well, with Kant, whatever you end up saying his view is, there will always be Kant scholars who say otherwise. So you have to be very careful about that.
But I mean, literally, you just started non-naturalism, and I thought a realist non-naturalist view was quite difficult to hold because, you know, I think if it's realist, it has to be, well, not has to be, but it would be stronger to ground it in some natural properties like pleasure, pain, things like that. So I think it's quite interesting, from that perspective to say it is non-naturalist.
Yeah, I do think, by the way, that moral and perhaps more broadly normative facts are grounded in natural ones. But I think that there are different kinds of grounding. That the kind of grounding that's relevant here is one that does not create a problem for my way of specifying robust realism. I should also say, if you want, you named a few what we sometimes call gray dead philosophers. So if you want the graded philosophers that seem to go with something like this view, I guess the two names that people would mention first will be Plato and Moore. So these are the kinds of
Right,
people.
yeah, more. Yeah, because he's an
also
intuitionist, isn't he?
yes, again, there are different ways of reading different people, and I don't do this with philosophy.
Okay.
But another thing that may be significant is that we are gaining grounds. There's a kind of a serious philosophical survey that they've published now twice, I think, once around 2010 and once around 2020. And they ask really nicely defined questions about many, many views, including about realism. And both moral realism and robust realism seem to be gaining grounds, which doesn't mean, of course, that they're true, but maybe it's not all that outlandish.
Right. Okay. That's very interesting. And so the second question I want to ask you about your view is, how do we come to know moral truths? Sort of like the epistemology of it all.
Yeah, this is a very important question, obviously. And I think that there's a way in which the question is easier than it looks, and then a way in which it's harder. The way in which it's easier is that I don't think that moral epistemology is that special. So I think, pretty much give me whatever general epistemology you have, it should plug in a nice way to moral epistemology as well. Or in particular, give me whatever epistemology you have for the a priori.
Yeah.
So for things like mathematics and logic and perhaps philosophy and perhaps other things, I don't think moral epistemology is that special. So in particular, for instance, I think this view, the view that I hold is sometimes called phenomenological conservatism. But what it means is roughly when it seems to you that so and so, this gives you some initial reason to believe that so and so.
Yeah.
It doesn't entail that so-and-so, but the fact that it seems to you that so-and-so gives you some reason to believe that. And then you can talk about perceptual seemings, that something seems red to you is some reason to believe it's red. But you can also talk about intellectual seemings, which we sometimes call intuitions. So the fact that something seems wrong to me or that something seems irrational to me gives me at least some reason to believe that it's wrong or that it's irrational. So these are the starting points, it seems to me, to epistemology everywhere, but also to epistemology in the moral case.
Yeah.
And in this respect, I think the question of the epistemology of morality is not that hard. It's just a particular instance of the general epistemology. I do think, however, that a serious worry remains. This is how the problem may become harder. And that's further down the road, as it were. So even if we recognize that, say, when it comes to justifying beliefs, morality is not a special case and not a harder case than many other things, there is still a worry, specifically for robust realism.
Yeah.
And that worry is, and I'm going to put it somewhat quickly now, but the worry is roughly the following. Suppose that there are these moral facts, and we have all these moral beliefs. Now, I believe that the moral facts don't depend on us in any way.
Yeah.
I also believe that the moral facts are causally inert. They don't have any causal powers, okay? So now, is there any correlation between the moral facts and the moral beliefs? If there is no correlation, then you should probably discard all of your moral beliefs, right? If I tell you that you have like a set of 100 beliefs and less than 50 of them are true, and you can't distinguish which are which, you should just suspend judgment about all, right?
Right, yeah.
So we should assume because otherwise all hell breaks loose. Otherwise, we have to be moral skeptics. We have to assume that there's some correlation between the moral facts and the moral beliefs. And then the question arises, what explains this correlation? If you are some kind of subjectivist, you think that what explains the correlation is that the moral facts are created by our moral beliefs or attitudes.
Yeah.
If you're a naturalist, if you think that moral facts are natural and so have causal powers, then you think that our moral beliefs are causally affected by the moral facts. If you're a robust realist, these paradigmatic explanations are out. They're not available to you.
Yeah.
So the robust realist owes us an explanation for the purported correlation between the moral fact and the moral beliefs. And notice that this is so even if the initial justification for the beliefs is perfectly fine because moral epistemology is not that harder from other kinds of epistemology. So
Yeah.
this is the worry that I think is very serious. I try to take it seriously. I have something to say in response. I'm not sure it works. It's complicated. But anyway,
Yeah.
that's the kind of challenge that I think is the most important one.
Yeah, that's quite hard to think about, and I think we could talk about that, for hours or, you know. Yeah, yeah, it's good. I'll be thinking about that. But the third question I wanted to ask you was, what are your reasons for defending robust realism? Because I have, in all fairness, I haven't read your whole book entirely, but I have done some research on it, and I came across the spinach test, and the argument from deliberative indispensability.
So let's talk about both, but I should say that they serve very different roles.
Yeah,
The spinach test is really just an intuition pump. It's a way of trying to see what your intuitions are about the relevant case.
yeah,
And that's from a paper that is called something like "Why I'm an Objectivist About Ethics and Why You Are Too."
yeah,
And the thought there is that there's this kid who hates spinach, and then says that he's really happy that he hates spinach.
yeah,
And when you ask them why are you happy that you hate spinach, they say, well, because if I'd liked it, I would have eaten it, and it's yucky. And there seems to be something problematic going on. The kid is making some mistake, which is what makes the joke amusing.
yeah,
And I offer a diagnosis, as you should never do with jokes unless you're a philosopher, right? And the diagnosis is that being yucky is a function of someone being disgusted.
yeah,
And the kid's mistake is that he or she they're imagining a world in which they like spinach, but somehow they hold constant the fact that it's yucky.
yeah,
Because if you're imagining a world in which you like spinach, and if what makes it yucky is that you don't like it, then in that world, it's no longer yucky, right? So the kid's mistake is that they treat yuckiness as if it's an objective property,
right,
whereas really it just depends on what you are disgusted by.
yeah,
And then I say, well, we can tell similar jokes, similar sounding or similar structured jokes
yeah,
about other properties. And the question whether they're amusing or not will disclose to us whether we think of the relevant property as objective or not. So if I say something like, I think these are my examples. If I say something like, I believe that the Earth revolves around the sun, of course, had I grown up before Copernicus, I would have believed that the Earth is in the center of the universe. But I'm really happy I didn't, because that's false.
yeah,
That doesn't sound at all amusing. It makes perfect sense to hold the relative motion of the sun and the earth constant, even when you're imagining a world in which your beliefs are different, right? That's a strong indication that we take the relative motion of the sun and the earth to be objective, not to depend on us.
yeah,
And now the question is, well, let's play this game for a moral thing, right? So I say something like, I believe in gender equality. I'm also not too arrogant. I'm not that arrogant to think that I would have believed in gender equality no matter where I grew up, right? So I know that had I grown up in a different era or in a different social milieu that was extremely sexist, I would not have believed in gender equality. But I'm happy I didn't grow up in those settings, because gender equality is important and of value.
yeah,
And this to me sounds not amusing at all. It makes sense, precisely like the point about the earth and the sun, and not like the spinach case. And if so, this is an indication that we think of the property of moral wrongness or rightness, or whichever is the relevant moral property, we think of it as perfectly objective, does not depend on us. As I said, this is not exactly an argument, it's more an intuition thought. It's more a
yeah,
way of trying to show you, even if you've never thought or never spent enough thought about this kind of thing, to show you that really your deep commitments are objectivist.
yeah,
This is there. But in my book, I develop a kind of combination of two arguments. One argument, which you didn't mention, is to an extent, I mean, very widely speaking, political. The thought there is roughly that if we are in a conflict and the conflict is based on something purely subjective, like both of us want something, or I prefer this ice cream and you prefer that ice cream, or something like this. If it's just about us and our preferences,
Yeah.
then the right way to resolve conflicts is typically symmetrical, like splitting the difference, tossing a coin, going in turns, something symmetrical. But if we are in a conflict that's based on a moral disagreement, then merely splitting the difference does not seem like a good idea. Then the moral truth makes a difference.
Yeah.
So, for instance, I think I give the example of suppose we are wondering how to proceed on some matter and which way we should proceed. One of them will cause pain to a dog, one of them will not. So the question which way we should proceed will partly depend on whether dogs' pain counts. That's a moral question. It seems to me there's a truth of the matter. It does. And that means that at least in principle, I shouldn't split the difference. I should stand my ground.
Yeah.
So I think that this is a really important point about personal disagreement and conflict. And in this respect, politics is not that far away. But I think that in order to accommodate this point, what we need at the end of the day is something like the objective moral truth that I argue for. So this is one kind of argument from the moral, practical implications of objectivity. Shall I say a few words about the indispensability argument, or is this becoming too long?
I mean, we have time. I was just going to ask you one simple thing on that. You talk about like how we should hold steady to our like intuition in the case of moral disagreements when it comes to the dog harming, and then how we should maybe be like more symmetrical or like more impartial when it comes to a non-moral disagreement. But surely that could just be down to like the intensity of our preferences, right? So in the case of the ice cream, our preferences for some ice cream are like they might be strong, but they're not strong enough to like lose friendship or things like that, right? And then on the other hand, with the dog, we don't want to see a dog being hurt. We might have more of a preference against the dog, against any harm whatsoever. And so maybe some like anti-realists may say that, well, look, the reason why there might be the reason why we might think that there's some truth in the matter is because in the second case, our preferences are just stronger. And so we might say that there's truth in the matter because our preferences are stronger, but that's just a facade. And so this argument trying to demonstrate some objective moral truths may just fail. How would you respond to that?
Yeah, that's a very good hypothesis to entertain, and then to try and check. And the way you check such hypotheses is by thinking about other hypothetical examples, right? So you can think about examples where all there is something due to preferences, but we can start to raise the significance of the intensity of the preferences, or how strong they are. It seems to me that even when they are extremely strong, we will still recognize the symmetry. But you can think about this as a homework, right? So this is one case. The other case is in the opposite direction. Have a moral case that's not extremely consequential, and still it seems to me that we think the situation is different. It's not just about me. What matters here is not the fact that I will get what I want or that I won't get what matters here is the dog's pain and its moral significance, not right. But of course, you're right that this is a perfectly legitimate alternative explanation that should be discussed. And as the case may be, I think it can be rejected. But if I'm wrong, then the argument fails.
Yeah.
All right. So deliberative indispensability there, what I say is analogous to explanatory indispensability arguments. So why should we believe in, say, quarks? You don't typically see quarks. They don't bump you in the head. Maybe they do, but you don't know, right? And the standard story is that, well, we should believe in quarks because our best scientific theories, which are our best attempts at explaining everything around the world, quantify over quarks.
Yeah.
So that's why you should believe in quarks. And that seems to me like, in broad outline, a good story. One way in which we can justify our ontological commitment in, say, subatomic particles is by the fact that they play this indispensable explanatory role. We can't explain the world as well as we can with them, without them. Okay.
Yeah.
And then, sorry?
No, sorry, keep going.
And then the important thing for me is that we can think about another way in which things may be indispensable, even if they're not indispensable for explanatory stories. They can be indispensable for deliberation. So deliberation is the process of trying to make up your mind about what to do.
Yeah.
And not always, but sometimes when we deliberate, we ask normative questions. Right? We can ask things like, what is the right action? Or what is the rational action? Or which action is the one that it makes most sense for us to do, or something along these lines, right? They don't have to be the philosopher's terms, but something along these lines. And I argue that once the process of deliberation is properly understood and characterized, you see that the only way of making sense of it, or anyway, the best way of making sense of it, is by understanding it as at least sometimes involved in the seeking of reasons and of normative truths and facts. So you try to find out what is the fact about what it makes most sense for you to do, or what is the fact about rationality, or what is the fact about permissibility, or about obligation, or something along these lines. Now, when we seek something, we may not find it, of course, either because it doesn't exist, or even if it exists, because of other issues. But when we seek something, there's a sense in which we presuppose that it is findable. Not necessarily that we will find it, but that it is findable.
Yeah.
And so I try to develop the details of this argument in analogy to arguments from explanatory indispensability, and to claim that just as the explanatory indispensability of quarks earns them ontological respectability, so does the deliberative indispensability of normative facts and truth earn them ontological respectability.
Okay. I have to say, for most of my time researching philosophy, I've only been doing it for like a couple of years, but I used to hold fast to more anti-realism, and I have to say, you're arguing to convincing me ever so slightly. So I'd like
That's
to.
That's a very nice compliment. Thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah, that they are all the questions that I have. So yeah. So thank you very much for taking the time.
It's my pleasure. My pleasure.
Absolutely.
Thanks for having me.
No problem.
Thank you so much for making it to the end of this video. I really hope you did enjoy. It was so interesting and so fun to talk to Professor Enoch. And yeah, I hope you took as much value out of it as I did. Yeah, as I said, it was really interesting. So yeah, and also I'm very sorry about the slow uploads. This is the most recent video I published since April. But I've had a lot of exams and a lot of coursework to do, and that's taken precedent. But yeah, I'm hoping to get back onto the uploads this summer. So yeah, thank you very much.